If you've been following the hobby for a while, you might remember a quadcopter called the DM007. It stood out for several reasons, but primarily for its unusual two-cell brush direct drive setup, which raised some eyebrows at the time. The manufacturer behind the DM007 was called Daming, and while the model itself was gradually phased out in favor of the slightly altered GW007 from another manufacturer called Global Drone, Daming is still around. After 2 years of sporadic releases like the DM003 and 009 met with varying success, the DM002, an inexpensive micro FPV quadcopter, appeared online. It's a big departure from previous Daming models, and despite some telltales to suggest that is the case, I honestly don't know whether or not it's from the same manufacturer. Regardless, it's an interesting piece of kit, seemingly trying to do the same for outdoor FPV that the recently reviewed Eachine E010C did for indoor FPV, making it both more wallet and beginner friendly. Welcome to this review of the DM002 micro quadcopter from, well, I don't know. The DM002 comes in a kit with some assembly required. If you don't consider yourself practically inclined, don't worry though. I unfortunately lost the footage of when I assembled mine, but the process is very simple. It takes only maybe 10-15 minutes and involves no soldering and no screwing. Wait, that came out weird. So while the assembly shouldn't pose a problem regardless of skill level, it's not particularly exciting or educational either. Most of your time will be spent snapping parts of the frame together and trying to figure out how to keep the wires from getting tangled in the propellers. When finished, you'll end up with a product that doesn't stand out visually, but does offer a few nice conveniences some alternatives don't. The camera is adjustable to a degree that should satisfy all flight styles. There's an actual battery compartment as opposed to just a rubber band or piece of velcro, and the frame actually protects the flightboard somewhat. My only complaint is that there seems to have been no thought spent on how to transport the quadcopter once built. Let's run through some technical aspects of the kit. The quadcopter uses a direct drive setup with brushed 7mm diameter motors, standard for toy-grade micro multirotors. Finding a replacement that fits should be no problem, though maybe not with the plug that makes connecting them to the flightboard so easy. The all-in-one FPV module has no make or model, but a 150-degree diagonal field of view, 600 TV lines of resolution, and a small cloverleaf antenna. A nice surprise is that the transmitter power is configurable and can be set to either 0, 25, 80 or 200 milliwatts. The stock battery consists of a single LiPo cell with low-C micro connector and a modest 300 mAh of capacity. The battery compartment does allow for bigger replacements though, as long as they have the same approximate width and height. The transmitter with the signature SPY branding, a remnant from the first model which was called the DM007, is basically the only connection between the 002 and previous Daming models. As long as you don't mind jeopardizing your secret agent cover, it offers a pretty good experience as far as toy-grade transmitters go. Comfortable proportions, button placements and sticks, which should work for thumb as well as pinch flyers. Discounting whatever components ends up as a part of the assembled quadcopter, the DM002 comes with one set of extra propellers, a special tool for removing the propellers from the motors, a USB charging cable, and 2 sets of instructions, one for building and one for operating the quadcopter. The translation is rough throughout, but the latter takes things to a whole new level by, on top of this, covering a completely different product, the DM009 I think. Fortunately, most of the information still applies, including how to calibrate the quadcopter. As I've been typing up these reviews, I've become increasingly aware of how often I say that something flies well or flies fine. Well, maybe you won't have to hear me repeat any of those phrases in this review, even though I just did, as things are a bit more complicated with the DM002. It all comes down to a single aspect of the flight characteristics. The yaw, for whatever reason, has a huge dead band in the middle, which is just a fancy way of saying that moving the stick near the center doesn't freaking do anything. As you may be able to tell, this makes measured turning near impossible, as the quadcopter up to a certain point won't respond to yaw input at all, and after that point will respond too much instead. I should note that while the DM002 doesn't use the same protocol as earlier Daming models, it can still be flown with newer versions of the Deviation firmware, thanks to its very active community. Surprisingly though, this is one instance where I didn't find it to make a significant difference. Apparently, the yaw deadband doesn't stem from the transmitter but the flight controller, meaning there is no way around it. The DM002 is not broken or poor handling overall though. Apart from this one aspect, it flies fine. Damn it, I said it again. It hovers nicely, has okay punch and 3 rays presenting some variation. Obviously I can't say whether the deadband issue will be a deal breaker for you, but I would at least advise against buying the quadcopter solely for indoor flying because of it. Moving on to a more positive point, the all-in-one FPV module performs very well for its tiny form factor. Picture quality is overall good, especially the sensitivity and adjustment to varying light conditions. So is range, in an open outdoor environment, basically matching that of the stock transmitter, already on the lower of the 3 output power setting. I was also pleasantly surprised by averaging around 4 minutes of actual flight time per charge of the stock battery on the 25mW output power setting. The LVC warning, which is supposed to notify you when the battery is running low, often completely misses the mark though, triggering only a minute or so into the flight for me. This could be due to chilly weather, known to affect LiPo batteries, as spring hadn't fully arrived at the time of this review. Still, I recommend using a timer. In conclusion, the DM002 would have been an obvious recommendation if it weren't for its yaw deadband issue. It's easy to assemble, easy to operate, and despite being really affordable, the FPV experience can hold its own against basically any micromotor rotor out there. I've flown my DM002 a lot over the past 2 weeks, and once I got used to how it handles, had a lot of fun with it. But I suspect not everyone will have as much patience or be as forgiving with it. Because of this and the myriad of alternatives out there, I unfortunately can't unreservedly recommend the DM002.